Hello,
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm good. So, Kevin, so you're preparing for the general, FANG data science interviews, generally targeting some product data science roles. And so you set up a mock interview with me, so that way I can kind of give you some prep questions that can be really helpful for product data science in general, right?
Yeah, I think this is the most effective way to practice, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So even though this is, obviously based on Facebook, the type of, questions that we go through in this mock interview is going to be helpful for other, product data science interviews, whether it's like Snapchat, or, one of the subsidiaries within Facebook, which is like Instagram, or even TikTok. So hopefully that you're going to find a lot of benefit to this mock interview that I'll be conducting for you.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So in order to focus on this mock interview, what we're going to do is we're going to go through like a product sense, and I'll follow up with the SQL question. And along the way, if you have any questions, obviously, you can definitely ask clarifying questions, those sort of things.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is, all right. So how would you measure user churn on Instagram?
Okay, let's see. So I think the first thing is a couple of clarifying questions I would want to clarify before we move forward. So user churn. So user churn usually just means that it's the way I think about it is inactive users. So do you want me to kind of define more concrete time frame for that inactivity on my own, and then the type of actions that it takes?
So I would actually honestly prefer if you kind of perhaps just think about the initial guiding approach and then maybe kind of work your way around this instead of me,
Okay,
telling you this is what you should be looking at first.
yeah, of course. And then, so Instagram, it's pretty broad. There are even multiple offerings within Instagram. For example, you have the regular posts, you have stories, you have explore page, and then now you even have a shopping tab. Is there any subsection within Instagram that you want me to focus on?
You know what? Let's just say general users.
General user. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and can I know who the stakeholder is, are that are interested in this, knowing this measurement?
Yeah. So I would say maybe like executives, people who are on the higher up on the Instagram chain.
Okay. 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 So in this case, I think even before we define a very quantitative, measurable metric on this, I'll kind of back up a little bit and then think about Instagram as a platform. So it's primarily is a photo sharing app, but it has evolved into I think a lot more than just photo sharing, and generally a very useful way for people to connect with each other. And then it's also I think it's unique in a way that the user demographic is quite different from Facebook as a whole.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a pretty important business to Instagram. So in terms of if executives want to know user churn, I think they primarily want to know, I would guess there are two ways you can think about it, right? So maybe there is just a decrease in the number of active users, and then we can define whether how we define active later. But then there's also, I would also want to think about kind of engagement drop. So maybe the users are kind of just checking a lot less frequently.
Mhm.
So they don't necessarily churn all the way, like they're not deleting their account, for example, but then maybe their time now are getting pulled to other competitors. So like you mentioned, like Snapchat, TikTok, that sort of thing. So I would also almost in a way to kind of think about that as a user churn in a way if the engagement time is decreased a lot. So I would say right now, let me try to kind of type out some notes. So one is totally active users. And then two is then dramatic drop in. So which of these do you want me to focus on more? I think both are very important and they kind of answer different questions for the stakeholder.
When you think about this for a second, first of all, you have to have a way to measure that before you can prioritize on the second one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's now talk about more details on how to define it. So totally inactive users, I would think about this. I would want to define some kind of time frame for someone to be classified as inactive.
Okay.
So you can think about it as, well, there are many ways, right? So I can think about how many times they log in. Say if they don't log in a 7-day period, we can consider a churn. Or we could also consider that maybe you want an even more fine-grained level where they kind of log in, but then they're not, I guess this relates to the second point more. So they log in, but they're not doing any engagement. And by engagement, I mean, they're not liking any posts, they're not viewing any stories, they're not posting, they're not commenting, they're not direct messaging any users. So let's see, for the first case, I think the way I'll define it would be, say, within a 7-day period, say, log number of users who have not logged in now, 7-day period. And then, so that's a total number of user churn in that 7-day period.
Okay.
And then for engagement, I would say also within 7-day period for user engagement, I would say, for example, I guess for this one, I would define a rate. So total number of unique users, and then which number of so this is kind of how I would imagine engagement. So within a 7-day period, so what is the average number of engagement actions? So engagement actions here I'm defining as liking, commenting, posting, or viewing stories, or making stories, or making direct messages. So any kind of action other than just log in onto the platform, taken during the 7 days, and then divide by the total number of unique user. So that'll kind of give you an average rate, and you can watch how that rate change. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple follow-up questions, starting with this.
Sure.
So why 7 days?
So yeah, the 7-day for me is to kind of deal with things that are, for example, day of the week effect. So for example, I would imagine that maybe people check Instagram less on Tuesday than say on Friday or Saturday, like for example on the weekend. So I think kind of give you that 7-day period, smooth out some of this periodic nature of Instagram engagement.
Okay, got it. And I noticed that you've essentially kind of subdivided churn in terms of 2 different buckets, right?
Yeah.
You have a case where someone logs in and then no activity, and then another case where basically they just don't engage as much anymore, right? But if you had to basically just pick one as your definition for churn, which one would you actually pick?
Yeah, especially for the business holder. So, in the beginning, I asked who, like the executives are the ones that are interested in this, right? And I think this is much more important, the dramatic drop in user engagement. So the reason being that, for example, how Instagram as a platform makes money is through advertising, right? So you need the users to actually be using the platform instead of, kind of just briefly logging in and then be on the platform. Then they're not gonna see ads as often, for example, right? And if they're not if they're not engaging with the app long term, they probably aren't. It's probably an indicator that they're not having a good time. So they're not having a good user experience with the application. So this, I think, serves as a very, very important kind of indicator. So you can kind of watch out for things that may go wrong before they catastrophically go wrong. So to me, like total inactive users, if they're not even logging in, it's very hard to pull the users back, right? Instead of versus users who are right now they're on the platform but just not using your platform as much, then maybe if we kind of monitor this metric, then we can inform the business holders that, okay, we're seeing this drop in user engagement, then they can kind of devise new strategies to pull it back. So I think the second one is a lot more important in terms of defining user churn.
Okay, got it. And one last question, which is sign in. So would you consider sign in as like a engagement?
Sign in as engagement. I think I would think about it as, to me, I wouldn't consider that as an engagement, just because, sign in, there's no measurement of, for example, how much time they spent on the platform, right? So all the other engagement, although it's not direct measurement of how much time they spent on the platform, it's still an indirect measurement for the time. And then also, people usually, so for example, if you have the Instagram app on your phone, usually people don't like log out and then log back in, right? So I think that having that login it's not a very useful indicator to me.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So now I'm going to set you up an SQL question. If you just give me a second.
Okay.
All right. So now, sort of kind of following up on this.
Okay.
So suppose that the definition of churn here is basically if they haven't displayed any active behavior, and that is reading, comment, like, and post the past 7 days. Okay.
Okay.
Now, how many users have churned as of today? Use the table below to address this question. And I'm going to paste the table. Give me a second.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a table. As you can see, you have a timestamp, user ID, and activity in this usage table. Now, use this table here to basically address this question, which is finding out how many users have churned.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. So we're reporting just the number of users churn and not in terms of dividing by the total number of users.
Yeah,
right? So we're not defining churn rate.
Yeah, it's a simple.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. So activity, comment, my post. So sign in. I'm assuming this one. It's interesting how we tie that back into the product question. So I would assume that this is not an engagement activity. Is that right?
Yeah.
For sign in. Yeah. Okay. So let me kind of outline. So I think I would count to get the number of user. I would do count distinct user ID to get distinct number of users, and then you also need to apply a filter on the activity, and then also you need to filter out by timestamp. So let's do that. So I'll kind of write it out, and then I would explain kind of the way I construct everything at the end. Usage where I almost did a list comprehension there like we do in Python, but I don't think that worked. But so I'm gonna do this.
Let's just suppose that for those who are obviously watching this mock interview, it doesn't matter what SQL query you're using, whether it's Postgres,
okay.
Or MySQL. The purpose is just to get the logic of things. So it can be like pseudo SQL in a sense.
And then you only want past 7 days. So between now, actually no. Past 7 days. Okay. So let's see. So let's start from here. So I'm selecting from this table, and then I kind of filter out based on activity. So now I'm only showing the activities. I don't care about activities that are not real engagement, right? So for example, sign in. And then so this will filter it down to only activities that are actual engagement activities. And then they also have the corresponding user ID. And then I'm also filtering based on the timestamp. So I'm doing between now minus 6 days and now. So I'm assuming past 7 days. Well, we didn't define if we want today or not, but yeah, so this would include today and then past 6 days, so which sum up to total 7 days. But if we want like 8 days, you can just add one.
I think there's a bit of confusion with the question. Maybe I might have accidentally said yes to something, but the question
Oh,
is
they
how
haven't.
many
Sorry.
users have churned, not how many
Yes.
users are active.
Yeah, this is actually the total opposite. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if
this
I
is
might have made a mistake along the way. I might have accidentally said yes to one of your clarifying question. But yeah, you need
yeah.
to, the target focus is to figure out the churn.
Let me check if the logic's right here. Let me see if this is right. So, for example, I'm checking if the activity is an engagement activity. So I'm using or statements for all of this. So that means that for any activity that belongs to this list, you would like you get a false. So if any of these qualify, so yeah, so I have four separate activity check. So if any of them fall into that activity list, like this statement will be on. So we also need a not right here. Okay, so I'm doing inverse. So essentially, yeah, this gives you this filters out all the activities are engagement activities, and then I filter down by time, and then so this will give you kind of a bunch of roles that has different timestamps within the past 7 days, and then different users and then their activities. But all the activities will be engagement activity, well, non-engagement activity. So then I simply count the distinct user ID there.
Do you see any potential flaw with this?
Yeah, let me see. Haven't displayed any active behavior past 7 days.
The underlying assumption is that all of the events across all of the users are logged. But then what about a case where a user has logged in or done activity prior to those 7 period, but then no longer their event is being registered in the table? Then how are you counting those users outside of that 7-day window period?
Let's see, haven't displayed any active behavior past 7 days. So I thought, let's see. So I thought they have to for them to qualify as a churned user, they just simply cannot have any of these active behavior within the 7-day period. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. So
but then what your query doesn't consider is like a case where a user prior to those 7 days were active, and then no longer they're not doing any activity or they didn't sign in at all. And your query at the moment doesn't count for those users.
Oh, okay, I see.
Because
so
you have pre-imposed within the past 7 days, and then among users who have essentially signed in, you're looking at users who have not displayed its activities, and then you're doing a distinct count on them.
Okay, so
a smaller subset of the population, not the entire users who would be considered churn.
Okay, so let me ask a few clarifying questions. So if I don't do any filtering on the time and then count all the distinct user ID in this table, will that give me the entire user population?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. So maybe I'll actually do this.
I'll give you about just minute or two to basically just revise the solution.
revision based also because of the time constraint. Let me think if this works. So essentially what I'm now doing is I'm counting the total number of users that we have. This is what this inline does. And then my attempt is to minus out any users that have any like engagement activity in the past 7 days. So that will give you that you'll be left with only users who are like essentially churned in the past 7 days. So yeah, that is my solution.
Okay, got it. Great. Well, thanks for these questions. And then now we're going to segue over to the solutions portion, and we're going to go through the questions in the order they were asked.
Sure.
All right. So, okay. So let's start by talking about the product sense questions because I had a couple notes. Things that were good and things I think could use some improvements. All right. So the general kind of impression of how you were approaching this problem was really solid in the sense that you communicate things really well. You're very clear about what is what it is that you're articulating. You provided enough details for me to understand it. More often than not, candidates might over-explain or under-explain, but in your case, you had an idea and then you explained just enough for me to kind of get your point. So that's really good in terms of communication, which is a very common attribute that's being assessed during a technical interview. The second thing is I really like how you were asking clarifying questions, made things very engaging with the interviewer. And for generally speaking, for these type of technical interview, that it's best not to do like a monologue, but kind of engage the interviewer, brainstorm ideas with this person. The more interactive it is, the better it is. That helps the interviewer know that you have a kind of good sense of like how do you collaborate with the person, right? And that is something that interviewers will kind of look for, you know. So those are the two things that were really great about how you were responding to those. All right, so now let's go through some of the areas for improvements. Okay, so actually one other thing that I just want to mention is that you started out in a good framework structure. Okay, let's have clarifying questions. Let's really understand what the target goal is. Second thing is understand the summary of, you know, basically the product context and the business goal, right? And you did those, you basically set up the background before you actually dive into solution, which is really good. Now let's talk about the solution itself. There's a couple things that I think you did really well, which is, so first of all, you kind of found like what is a good proxy for measuring, you know, inactive users. In this case, it is going to be essentially engagement, right? So you look at the engagement actions like click, read, comment, you know, post, right? And those are really good that, you know, you like brought up. Hey, Kevin. Hey, sorry. There was a little bit of disconnect on the internet on our part, and so we just you know, got back in, and now we're going to resume the session and going through the questions together. All right. So there are there are the couple things that you did really well in terms of you know, how you came up with the solution. So first of all, your sense about basically how you defined the you know, the churn in this case is basically inactivity, right? And the inactive actions that you were thinking about are you know, the read, the comment, the post, and you know, and those sort of things, right? So that's good that you were able to be very tangible about that, you know, because sometimes candidate will just say, you know, inactive or no usage, right? But then that doesn't really mean anything because usage can pretty much mean anything. And so the more you're able to be very concrete about what is the concrete actions that a user will take, you know, that will define whether they're active or not, you know, then that's good that you were able to flesh that out. The second thing that I think you also did really well is You defined a window period instead of just saying, okay, they're inactive, which is just vague by itself. You define what that window period is. In this case, you said a 7-day window period, right? Now, 7-day I thought was reasonable, but um, but in terms of your reasoning, in terms of why you picked 7-day period was a little bit kind of lacking because
Okay.
you mentioned the idea of, let's take the effect of like, maybe there's like some sort of seasonality associated to it, right? So maybe users might log in, Monday through Friday, but then they might not on the weekends, or it might be the other way around or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But the other aspect that I think you could have definitely considered was the fact that when you think about Instagram, the way it's somewhat designed is like almost like a daily engagement kind of thing, right? Like they have what's one of their core features? Well, there's really two like primary features. As soon as you go on the homepage, right? The first one being the stories, and then the second one being the scrolls, right? And the way it's somewhat designed is that it's like you want to be in constant loop with what your friends are doing, right? Like,
Yeah, I
for
agree.
example, stories get removed, short period of time. These images that you see on a feed, you rarely see a post that was published 7 days ago. You see posts that were published today, not yesterday or a couple of days ago. So the underlying assumption is that, okay, we want users to be engaged on almost on a daily basis. But then if they're not active across the 7-day period, which is fairly, long, considering that assumption is like daily engagement, then they could be considered as like a churn. So obviously the 7-day, it could be like a 7-day, 14-day, 30-day. It really depends on the subtlety of like what is the user churn. Because with user churn, there could be different types of problems that you're solving in general. But that would have been a much better reasoning in terms of why you picked that 7-day period.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the feedback.
The other aspect to this is I was a little confused in terms of why you ended up picking two different definitions. Because, okay, so the question is, how do you measure user churn, not how do you measure user engagement? They sound a little similar, but they're not necessarily the same thing. If I ask, how would you measure user engagement on Instagram, then I think the way you define the metric, which is average number of engagement actions taken during 7 day, divided by whatever denominator would have made sense. But then the question is about user churn. So I thought that this is a little bit superfluous in terms of what you brought up there. That's why I had like a follow-up question, which is like, if you have to pick one, which one would you pick? I was kind of hoping that you would essentially pick total inactive users, not necessarily the user engagement in this case. So that was a little bit off mark, because you can kind of imagine this. There's a whole data science project revolving around predicting user churn. That way, Instagram could, build models that could prevent user churn. And this is pretty much true in almost any of the, product-based company, whether it's Lyft trying to prevent driver churn, rider churn, or Amazon trying to prevent churn, whether they're trying to prevent churn by sending out emails, push notifications, whatever it is. They want a clear label, ones and zeros, in terms of, okay, this user is going to churn the next 7 days or something like that, right? So picking one definition would have made sense. In this case, it would have been the first one, not necessarily the second one.
I see. Okay.
And I also asked, it's like sign-in engagement. Would you consider sign-in as an engagement? And you made I agree with you that, sign-in should not necessarily be considered as an engagement, because what could happen is that, user might have accidentally just signed in, but then they might immediately exit, right? So in that case, there's really no activity whatsoever. So it's just a little bit like a misregistration in terms of whether they would be considered active or not. And you provided reasoning behind that. So that was really good.
Okay.
And so in general, I think what you did really well is just like, you made a point, and then you made sure you provide justification. And when you provided justification, you did it just enough to for the interviewer to understand, and you didn't try to over explain it, and that was really good. So I would definitely keep up with the overall framework of how you responded to this. You started by asking clarifying questions. You laid out what the business and product goals are, and then from there you did like a deep dive. So in terms of the general structure, although there were a little bit of kind of problem areas in terms of some subtleties about what the user churn is, overall end to end, I thought you did a really good job with this.
Yeah, I agree with all the feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now let's go through the SQL question, which is all right. So this here, once again, in the beginning, you did a good job again, just asking clarifying questions, making sure you understand things. The couple things that was obviously a little problematic in the beginning. Maybe I might have misspoken. I can't remember, but the question is about how many users churned, not how many users active, and you started by addressing the question, right? And that kind of you end up kind of wasting some time by doing the wrong route. So just make sure you clearly understand what it is that's being asked, and then from there dive into the solution. Now let's think about your query itself. So this is actually not too different from, and I'm gonna paste my solution real quick. All right. So essentially the logic of what you try to do is the following. So let's take all of the global users, right? A unique set of all of the users, let's count them. And then let's take the users who are considered active, right? So you take this set, subtract it by this set, and then you count it. And then that's gonna give you all the users that have churned.
Yep.
And that's what you try to do. Obviously, this query would have so it's not so much, obviously if we were to run it, then I think there might be some maybe logical syntax errors, but in terms of what the logic of what you were going for makes sense. That's because what you're trying to do is basically get this right. And obviously if we were in an executable environment, you have a bit more time, you would be able to polish things up, and ultimately get the solution, which I believe. Yeah, so all in all, I mean, this is good kind of SQL logic in terms of being able to address this question, which is good. Now, if you look at my solution, in a way, it's not too different from how you were trying to approach it. So for me, I started with, let's take all the unique users, and then the second one is to get all the users who are active. And then I do like a distinct count on those users. And then from there, I basically take these unique users from the unique users, and then users from the active users past 7 days. And I do a set operation, which is minus, and then I count those cases, or those, which would I give them the result. So yeah, so again, you definitely did a good job with the SQL portion. And so really kudos,
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely the hints definitely help because I was heading into the wrong direction.
Yeah, but in general, I really loved how you were able to quickly make a pivot, realizing that you made a mistake. I mean, really, interviewers will often kind of give you some hint to make sure that you're going the right direction. And they're also looking to see whether you can recover. And in this case, you made a very quick recovery, which is really good.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, definitely appreciate your time for this mock interview. And best of luck with the upcoming interviews for your product data science roles.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your time.
Yep, sounds good. Bye, Kevin.
Okay. Bye.